My billionaire husband sneered I'd be nobody without him, then forged papers to steal everything, unaware I'd secretly turned his allowance into millions, and his secretary handed me 40 years of buried family secrets. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I set my house keys on the marble counter of a $6 million penthouse and watched my husband's face do something I'd never seen it do before. It went blank. Not angry, not sad, just blank, like a screen-losing signal. "You wouldn't last a week without me, Mila," Ashton had said 20 minutes earlier, swirling his scotch like he was in a movie about himself. "Without my money, you'd be nobody." I reached into my Chanel bag, a gift like everything else in that apartment, and pulled out the keys. House key, car fob, the little brass key to the wine cellar he'd been so proud of. I lined them up on the counter in a neat little row, like evidence at a crime scene. "Let's find out," I said, and I walked out in the dress he'd bought me, into an elevator he'd paid for, onto a street where, for the first time in 4 years and 3 months, nobody was waiting to ask where I'd been. By midnight, I was checking into a suite at the Langham. Cash. My cash. Money I'd made playing with stocks, as Ashton liked to call it at parties, usually right before some banker friend of his laughed along. What none of them knew, what he never bothered to find out, was that I'd turned his $10,000 a month allowance into $4.3 million over 4 years. And what I knew, that he didn't know I knew, was about to end his entire family. I'd been married to Ashton Whitmore for 4 years, 3 months and 6 days when I found the voice recorder on the floor of his study. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't always like this. Suspicious, calculating, keeping receipts. When I met Ashton, I was 26, working the front desk at a boutique hotel in Soho, putting myself through night classes in finance because I'd always been good with numbers. Embarrassingly good. The kind of good that made high school teachers ask if I'd cheated. Ashton came in for a business dinner that was really just him and Nathan Cole, his best friend since boarding school, getting drunk on a Tuesday. He was charming, generous. He remembered my name the second time he came in, then the third, then he started requesting me specifically, then he asked me to dinner, and within 8 months I was wearing a ring that cost more than my mother's house. My mother, for what it's worth, cried at the wedding, not happy tears. She pulled me aside in the bathroom of the plaza and said, "Mila, baby, you don't owe anyone your whole life just because they bought you a ring." I told her she was being dramatic. I was wrong. She was being a mother. The early signs were small enough to explain away. Ashton managing my finances, so you don't have to worry about it, baby. Ashton choosing my friends. Helen's circle is just better for us, socially. Ashton's father, Richard Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Capital Management, looking at me across the Thanksgiving table like I was a piece of furniture he was deciding whether to keep, and the allowance. $10,000 a month, deposited into an account he could see, that he could close with one phone call. "For your little hobbies," he called it. My little hobby was reading 10Ks at 5 a.m. before he woke up. My little hobby was a brokerage account under my maiden name that he didn't know existed, opened the same week we got married, funded with birthday checks from my grandmother that I never told him about. By year 2, that account had $340,000 in it. By year 4, it had $4.1 million. I never told him, partly because I liked having something that was mine, and partly, though I didn't fully admit this to myself yet, because some animal part of my brain had started keeping a go bag packed in the back of my own closet, long before I understood why. That Tuesday started like any other. Ashton left early for a meeting with his father. I was in the study looking for a charger when I knocked his leather portfolio bag off the desk, and a small black voice recorder tumbled out and hit the hardwood. It started playing. Ashton's voice, mid-laugh, talking to Nathan. "That type is perfect. Pretty enough for photos, dumb enough to control." I stood frozen, the charger still in my hand. "Mary Beauty, rent intelligence," he said, and Nathan laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. My stomach dropped, but my hands, strangely, didn't shake yet. That came later. Right then, I just felt very, very still. The way you feel right before a car accident, when you can see it happening, but your body hasn't caught up. I told myself it was a joke. Guys talk like that, don't they? Locker room stuff. He didn't mean me specifically. I told myself this while my thumb hit rewind, and I listened to it 3 more times, and each time it sounded less like a joke and more like a job description. My job description. I put the recorder back exactly where it fell, and then, because some part of me had apparently already made a decision before the rest of me caught up, I started looking through the rest of his bag. That's where I found the folder. Post-nuptial agreement. Amendment, no. 2. My signature was on page 14. I have signed my name probably 10,000 times in my life. I know what my signature looks like when I'm tired, when I'm rushed, when I'm signing a credit card receipt at a restaurant. This wasn't any of those. The M had a loop at the bottom that my actual signature never has. I noticed it because I'd noticed it before, on a Christmas card to his mother that I never wrote. I sat down on the floor of his study, holding a legal document that would have stripped me of the apartment, the car, and access to any joint accounts the moment I, and I quote because I read it 4 times, engaged in conduct detrimental to the Whitmore family's reputation or business interests. Conduct detrimental, vague enough to mean anything, specific enough that I knew exactly who'd be deciding what counted. My hands started shaking then, finally caught up. My phone buzzed at 2:14 p.m. Unknown number. I have 40 years of information you need. Tomorrow 1 p.m. Wohop, Chinatown. Come alone. I should have been more scared of that text than I was. Looking back, I think I'd already crossed some invisible line in Ashton's study, and nothing after that felt as scary as it should have. The next day, at a corner table at Woe Hop, surrounded by the smell of soy sauce and the clatter of woks, a woman in her early 60s sat down across from me, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of posture that said she'd spent 40 years in rooms where she wasn't supposed to be noticed. "Margaret Chen," she said, sliding a tin of butter cookies across the table like we were old friends meeting for tea. "I was Richard Whitmore's executive assistant for 38 years. Retired 8 months ago. Forced retirement, if we're being honest. They wanted someone younger at the front desk." Inside the cookie tin was a tube of red lipstick. It was heavier than lipstick should be. "Flash drive," Margaret said, not looking around, not lowering her voice, which somehow made it scarier. "Don't open it here." 40 years of what? I asked. "Of everything," she said. "I started keeping records in 1982. Richard's first wife, Caroline, died in a car accident on Route 9. Brakes failed. Perfect weather, dry road, no skid marks." She said it the way you'd read a grocery list. "The second wife, Diane, not the Diane you know, was committed to a facility upstate for exhaustion in 1991. Stayed 11 months, came out a different person. The third wife, Patricia, was arrested for embezzling from the family foundation in 1999. Charges were dropped quietly after she signed something. I have the something." She laid 4 photographs on the table, side by side, lining them up the same way I'd lined up my keys 2 days later, though of course I didn't know that yet. 4 women, all blonde, all roughly the same height, same build, same wide, trusting smile. "They pick wives like casting calls," Margaret said. "Pretty, a little insecure, no family with money or lawyers behind them. They use them for about 4 years. Long enough to be useful socially, not long enough to learn where the bodies are. Then they're discredited, removed, replaced. Before they start asking the wrong questions." I felt cold all over. "You're at 4 years and 3 months, Margaret said, and for the first time her composure cracked, just slightly, just at the corners of her eyes. "I watched it happen to 3 women I liked. I'm not watching it happen to a 4th. Do it now, Mila. Whatever it is you're already planning. Do it now while you still can." I hadn't told her I was planning anything. I didn't have to. Here's what I want people to understand. I didn't blow anything up that first week. I'm not an idiot, despite what Ashton apparently told his friends. Blowing things up gets you discredited, or worse, gets you a post-nup activated on grounds of erratic behavior. So I started small. $8,000. Moved from my brokerage account into a new LLC, Harlow Interior Concepts, named for absolutely nothing. Registered in Delaware by a lawyer named Renee Castellanos. 14 years at a white-collar defense firm before going solo. Recommended to me by, of all people, the concierge at the Langham, who I'd tipped well enough over the years that she had opinions about which lawyers were discreet. "Interior design consulting fees," Renee said, looking over the paperwork in her tiny office on the 11th floor of a building on Pearl Street. "All legal, all on the books. Nobody questions a wife who suddenly develops a hobby business, especially one that loses money on paper for the first year. It's the oldest trick in the divorce prep handbook, and it works because it's boring. 12,000 more, 2 weeks later, then 20. I wasn't hiding money. I'd had money for years. I was building a paper trail that explained why I'd have access to it when the time came. Meanwhile, Ashton's world started to wobble, and at first I genuinely thought it had nothing to do with me. 2 of Whitmore Capital's biggest clients pulled out within 10 days of each other, then a third, at a dinner party, one I almost didn't go to, except Renee told me to keep showing up to everything, act normal, document everything. I overheard Richard Whitmore on the phone in the hallway, voice low and furious. "Tell them it's a rumor, Tom. Tell them the SEC hasn't even—" He stopped when he saw me, smiled the way you smile at furniture, walked into the study, and shut the door. I texted Margaret that night. "SEC rumors. Already?" She wrote back within a minute. "I started those 8 weeks ago. I have friends at 3 of those clients' compliance departments. I told you, 40 years. I know exactly which dominoes to flick." I should have been frightened of Margaret. Honestly, some nights I was. But mostly, I was grateful, in the specific, dizzying way you're grateful to a stranger who pulls you out of traffic. Relief tangled up with the horrifying realization of how close you came to not being pulled. 3 weeks in, Ashton started coming home drunk. Not party drunk, stress drunk. The kind where a man pours his third scotch with hands that won't quite cooperate, and signs whatever paper is put in front of him because reading it requires more focus than he has left. I put a lot of papers in front of him. A power of attorney amendment, drafted by Renee, worded so carefully it looked like a routine update to our existing trust documents, that gave me signing authority over 3 accounts I'd previously had no access to. He signed it at 11:40 p.m. on a Thursday, between his 4th scotch and his 5th, while watching highlights from a Knicks game. "What's this for again?" he mumbled. "Tax thing. Your accountant needs it by Friday," I said. Signature. Done. My phone, propped against a vase of lilies, recording, the way it had been recording every conversation in that apartment for 2.5 weeks, got all of it. 3 days later was the ladies' auxiliary lunch at the university club, the one I'd been attending every month for 4 years, mostly in silence, while a rotating cast of Whitmore-adjacent wives discussed renovations and nannies and, periodically, me. Helen Brennan had a particular routine. Helen's husband ran a pharmaceutical company. Helen had an MBA from Wharton she mentioned roughly every 11 minutes, and a habit of asking me, with a tiny smile, how my cute little investment apps were doing. That day, I put down my fork. "Actually, Helen," I said, "my portfolio's up up 340% this year. I shorted Brennan Pharmaceuticals last month before the patent rejection on Velmara came through. Made a pretty significant return on that one, actually. I want to describe the silence that followed, but honestly, words don't quite do it justice. 12 women, mid-chew, all stopping at once. Somewhere a fork hit a plate. Helen's face went through about 4 colors. "You're joking," she said. "I have the trade confirmations if you'd like to see them," I said, and took a sip of my Pellegrino. And that was the last time anyone at that table made a joke about my cute little apps. I didn't realize in the moment how much that lunch would matter, but word travels in those circles faster than any SEC filing. By that evening, 3 different people had called Ashton to ask, with poorly concealed glee, whether his wife had really shorted Helen Brennan's husband's company. By the next morning, Richard Whitmore had heard about it too, and Richard Whitmore did not like being reminded, in front of his peers, that the dumb trophy wife had quietly made a fortune off information his own circle hadn't seen coming. I didn't know it yet, but that lunch was the first crack in Ashton's mask in public. Before that, whatever happened in our marriage stayed in our marriage. After that, people started watching. The next blow didn't come from me at all, and it scared me more than anything I'd done myself, because it meant the dominoes were falling faster than I could track. Diana Cole, Nathan's wife, a soft-spoken woman I'd always liked, who I'd assumed knew nothing about anything, filed for divorce, with receipts. Margaret got me the filing before it was even public record. Turns out 38 years as an executive assistant means you know paralegals at every firm in a 6-block radius. Diana's lawyer had included, as an exhibit, a string of emails between Ashton and Nathan from 18 months earlier. I read them standing in the bathroom of the penthouse with the door locked, my back against the tile, because I didn't trust my legs to hold me up anywhere else. In the emails, Ashton and Nathan discussed, casually, the way you'd discuss a fantasy football trade, what would happen once Nathan's situation resolves itself. Ashton, the emails said, would look out for Diana if anything happened to Nathan. There was a joke about life insurance. There was a joke that wasn't really a joke about how Diana's family trust would be a nice addition to certain portfolios. I sat on that bathroom floor for 40 minutes. Then I got up, washed my face, and printed everything. I bought a cheap brown wig and a department store dress 2 sizes too big from a Marshall's in Queens, paid cash, no card trail. I put on sunglasses I already owned, and on a Thursday afternoon, I walked into the lobby of Nathan Cole's office building, a building I'd been to a dozen times as Ashton's wife, where the doorman had never once looked at me twice, and this time, in my disguise, nobody looked at me at all. I slid a sealed envelope under the door of the executive offices, addressed to Nathan personally, containing copies of the same emails Diana's lawyer had filed, plus 3 more that hadn't made it into the court filing yet that Margaret had found in a backup server nobody had thought to wipe. 3 hours later, my phone, which I'd left on, propped on the lily vase, picked up Ashton's side of a phone call so loud I could hear it from the kitchen. "Nathan, what the hell are you—" A pause. "That's not what those say. You're taking it out of—" Another pause. Longer. "Nathan, Nathan." The call ended. Ashton sat very still for a long moment, staring at his phone. The Whitmore-Cole partnership, 22 years, the foundation of Ashton's entire business identity, was dissolved by end of day. That night, after Ashton left to deal with Nathan, 3 hours, 2 bars, came home reeking of bourbon and barely able to find the bedroom. I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop and a legal pad, and I called the number Renee had given me 3 weeks earlier. It rang twice. SEC Office of the Whistleblower. This is Agent Lisa Marquez. I'd later learn Marquez had spent 11 years prosecuting securities fraud at the U.S. Attorney's Office before moving to the commission, and that she had, by her own later admission, fielded maybe 4 tips in a decade that came with as much organized documentation as the one I gave her that night. "I need to report systematic insider trading at Whitmore Capital Management," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. 5 years of trade data, cross-referenced with non-public information about client mergers, FDA decisions, and earnings reports. I have time-stamped trade confirmations that match internal memos by date, sometimes by hour. "Ma'am, can I ask how you obtained—" "I'm Richard Whitmore's daughter-in-law. I've been married to his son for 4 years. I've had access to this apartment, his study, and 40 years of records kept by his former executive assistant, who is willing to be a named source." I took a breath. "I'm sending the files to this email right now. Trade logs, internal memos, audio recordings of conversations discussing the timing of specific trades relative to confidential client information. It's about 1,400 pages." There was a pause on the line. I could hear typing. "Ma'am," Marquez said, and her voice had changed, gone careful and focused in a way that told me she'd already started believing me. "I'm going to need you to not delete anything, and I'm going to need a callback number where I can reach you tomorrow morning that isn't this one." "You'll have it," I said. "One more thing." "Yes?" "There's also a cold case. A car accident on Route 9 in upstate New York, 1982. Brakes failure, no skid marks, ruled accidental. I don't know if that's your jurisdiction, but someone should look at it again. Richard Whitmore's first wife." The line was quiet for a second. "I'll make sure that gets to the right people," Marquez said. I didn't sleep. I packed instead, quietly, methodically, the way you'd pack if you'd been mentally rehearsing it for months, which I realized as I zipped the last bag I apparently had. 3 suitcases, my laptop with everything backed up to a drive Margaret had helped me set up under a different name, my passport, my real one, the one with my maiden name on the supplemental ID page that Ashton never knew I'd kept current. The lipstick flash drive. A printed copy of the post-nup with my forged signature, highlighted, with Renee's notarized analysis attached. I walked through the penthouse one last time at 3:04 a.m. The skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows looked exactly the same as it had 4 years ago. The night Ashton proposed on this same balcony, with this same view, both of us a little drunk on champagne and the idea of each other. Ashton was passed out in his study, head down on the desk, drool pooling on a stack of documents that I happened to know included 3 different drafts of merger paperwork, now sitting in an SEC evidence file with my name attached as the whistleblower. I took off my engagement ring and my wedding band and set them on the kitchen counter, next to the keys I'd take with me one more night and drop off with the doorman in the morning. I took off the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 3rd anniversary and set those down too. I left the dress I was wearing, changed into jeans and a sweater I'd bought myself with my own money the year before, folded neatly on a chair, and I wrote a note. Just 2 words on the back of one of his own business cards because I thought there was something fitting about that. Check your accounts. I left it on top of the keys. Then I picked up my 3 suitcases and walked out of the apartment, down the elevator, past the night doorman, Carlos, who'd worked there 19 years and who I tipped generously every Christmas, and who looked at my suitcases and just said, very quietly, "Good luck, Mrs. Whitmore," and into a cab, into a hotel suite I'd booked under my maiden name 3 days earlier with my own money, just in case. At 7:03 a.m., my phone lit up. Ashton, what is this? What does this mean? Mila, call me. I didn't call him. I drank coffee from room service and watched the second hand on the clock tick past 7:04, 7:05, 7:06. By 7:15, he'd called 9 times. I know because I counted, the way you'd count something you'd been waiting 4 years to count. By 9 a.m., and the calls had a different quality to them. Less anger, more confusion. I imagined him standing in the kitchen, holding my note, holding his phone, and then opening his banking app, and then opening it again because surely it was wrong. It wasn't wrong. The power of attorney amendment he'd signed 3 nights earlier, the tax thing, had, among other things, given me authority to act on 3 joint accounts that, as it turned out, contained not just our money, but a significant chunk of Ashton's personal trading capital, the kind he kept liquid for quick positions. At 6:58 a.m., and 5 minutes before his first text, Renee had executed a court-approved emergency asset freeze on those accounts, filed the night before, the moment I called Agent Marquez, on the grounds that the funds were potential proceeds of securities fraud and needed to be preserved pending investigation. I hadn't taken his money. I'd just made sure neither of us could touch it until the SEC said otherwise, which, given what was in those 1,400 pages, was going to be a very long time. By noon, his voicemails had changed again. I listened to one, sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed, hugging a pillow, my stomach in knots, even though, especially though, I'd planned every part of this. "Mila, please." His voice was wrecked, raw in a way I'd genuinely never heard before. Not in 4 years. "The FBI is here. They're going through Dad's office. There's people in the lobby with Mila, please. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me back." I deleted the voicemail. Then I turned on the TV. It was on every local channel by 6 p.m. Richard Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Capital Management, arrested in multi-agency fraud investigation. The footage showed Richard, 71 years old, silver-haired, always so impeccably composed at every family dinner I'd ever sat through, being led out of his Connecticut mansion in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Behind him, more agents carried out box after box of files, the kind of boxes you only see in movies, except this time Margaret Chen had spent 8 months quietly assembling exactly what was in them. A reporter, I later learned his name was Daniel Pierce, 15 years covering white-collar crime for the Wall Street Journal, stood outside the federal building that evening, and I watched him say something that made me put my coffee down. Sources tell us this investigation extends beyond securities fraud into at least one cold case from 1982 that's being reopened by the New York State Police, involving the death of Whitmore's first wife. We're also told the whistleblower in this case is a member of the Whitmore family by marriage. I turned off the TV. My phone buzzed. "Margaret, it's done. They're going to be picking through this for years. Caroline's case has been reassigned to a cold case unit. A detective named Wallace, good reputation, actually cares. I'll send you her contact if you want updates. You did good, kid." I cried then. The first time since I'd found that recorder, 3 weeks in a lifetime ago. Not from sadness. I genuinely don't know what the tears were for. Relief, maybe. Or grief for the version of me that had spent 4 years thinking $10,000 a month and a $6 million view was the best she could hope for. 3 weeks later, 21 days to be exact, though I wasn't counting on purpose, I promise. I was at the bar of the Ritz-Carlton with Renee, celebrating the fact that the post-nup had been formally voided, the forged signature confirmed by a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Yoon, 22 years in forensic handwriting analysis, whose report ran 11 pages and used the phrase "inconsistent with the subject's established signature pattern" so many times it became, briefly, our private joke. That's when Ashton walked in. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight. There was a gray patch at his temple I was fairly sure hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. His suit, the same kind of suit he'd worn every day of our marriage, tailored, expensive, looked like it had been slept in, because, I'd learn later, it had. "You destroyed everything," he said. His voice cracked on everything. The bar had gone quiet around us the way rooms do. I revealed everything, I said. There's a difference. He opened his mouth, I think to say something about lawyers, about the divorce, about the accounts, the kind of thing he'd have said with total confidence 3 weeks ago, the voice of a man who'd never once been told no and meant it. But nothing came out, because he knew, and I knew, and everyone in that bar who'd seen the news that week knew that there was nothing left to threaten me with, no accounts to freeze, no reputation of mine left to ruin, because mine had only ever existed in relation to his, and now his didn't exist at all. You said I wouldn't survive a week without you, I said. I picked up my glass. Champagne, the good kind, paid for with money I'd made reading 10Ks at 5 a.m. while he slept off whatever he'd had the night before. It's been 21 days. I took a sip. And you're the one drowning. 2 men in dark suits, hotel security, I assumed, though I never actually asked, appeared at Ashton's elbows with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested someone had called ahead. He started to argue, started to say something about lawyers, and who do you think you are? But his voice was already fading as they walked him toward the door, out into the kind of evening where, for the first time in his life, nobody was going to fix anything for him. The bartender, a woman named Teresa, I'd find out, who'd worked that bar for 6 years and had, by her own admission later, served Ashton Whitmore more drinks than she could count, set a fresh glass down in front of me without being asked. On the house, she said. That was long overdue. I still think about Margaret sometimes. Margaret Chen, who spent 38 years quietly cataloging the worst things a powerful family could do, waiting for someone who might actually use it. She testified eventually in both the SEC case and the reopened investigation into Caroline Whitmore's death. Detective Wallace, the cold case detective Margaret connected me with, told me last month that the brake line failure on Caroline's car in 1982 had, according to a mechanic's notes Margaret had kept for 43 years, been serviced 2 days before the accident by a shop that closed permanently 3 weeks later, and whose owner had received a payment from a Whitmore family account that same week. It's an active investigation. I can't say more than that. But I think soon Caroline Whitmore will finally get the thing nobody gave her in 1982. Someone asking real questions. Richard Whitmore is currently out on bail, awaiting trial on 11 counts of securities fraud, and facing a separate grand jury proceeding related to Caroline's death. Whitmore Capital Management doesn't exist anymore. The SEC revoked its registration 4 months ago. Nathan Cole settled with Diana for an amount that, according to Margaret, who still seems to know everything about everyone, made his lawyers cry. Ashton and I divorced quietly. There wasn't much to fight over since most of what would have been ours was either frozen, seized, or never legally his to begin with. He moved to his mother's place in Florida. I heard secondhand that he's actually working, a sales job, the kind of job he used to make jokes about at dinner parties. I don't feel triumphant about that exactly. Mostly I feel something quieter, something like the silence after a long, loud room finally empties out.